for me, it's less about thinking back to those memories, and it's more about imagining if Tupac were still with us,
Mm.
and what would he be doing, and how, like I think about like what if Pac had an Instagram or Twitter page, like you know, like those are the things that they make me feel good when I think about him because I knew his personality. I'm like, oh man, if they think this person's crazy, he would have been like on a thousand.
It's so great to speak to you. I've been a big fan since I was a little kid, so
Thank you so
great.
much, man. It's a pleasure.
I'm sure you get that all the time because I mean, obviously, like I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about like your early career, like getting into this show, because obviously you graduated high school in like 1990 in LaGuardia. You're immediately doing things like, Juice. And then this show is very much harkening back to that era and that world. Like, so what was it like going back to that for you?
It was it was interesting because I'm kind of a forward thinking person. I kind of like have a hard time reflecting, but it was great to like be back home filming in my hometown, and to your point, that time, that era, um just trying to capture the essence of it, the nuance of it. And what was interesting for me was that, well, the character that I play is not from that time. He's from a time before that, so his whole way of thinking and way of doing things is completely different than it was in the time that I came up, that I could relate to, because I was close to the age of Kanan, in the show, in the era. So that part of it was really fun to explore.
No, absolutely. No, I mean, I'm sure, diving back into that world is just, like, especially when you're acting opposite people who were, basically you and your friends. Like Kanan is, I'm sure, reminds you of people that you knew in some ways. So, I mean, did you feel like the younger cast was leaning on that experience, on that expertise? Were they asking questions like, was it like this? When people use that word, would people act like this in certain ways?
Yeah, it was certainly a collaboration in that way. I think the authenticity of the show is super important. And so whether it was verbiage or clothing, and I mean, the set designers were brilliant. I mean, the stuff that they were capturing, to see a phone booth like on the street, like, oh man, I remember when there used to be phone booths, and they used to, stuff like that, was it was great, because those are all the little aspects that a viewer may watch and not like really take in, like immediately, but it's in their subconscious. So it's adding to the layers of and the textures of the show. And yeah, I mean, we all kind of were on top of each other about all of that stuff, to just to make sure, like, because if anyone saw anything that looked like, well, that's not how it looked, or that's not what you would say, or we kind of all had the freedom to jump in and try to fix it.
Yeah, true. What was it about this show that you really connected with? Why was it like, okay, this is the next thing that I need to do. This is what I need to focus myself on. Like,
Well, for me, it was a few things. Well, a few reasons why I wanted to get on board with the show. I mean, one, to work with Courtney Kemp, 50, Sasha Penn, Lionsgate Stars. I was a fan of Power before this. Um, but for me, selfishly, to create this family drama, because that's really what it's about. And it's about, this show, Raising Canaan, is about a single mom who's trying to raise her kid. And
mm,
that's my life. I was from a single parent, household, from an amazing woman. Um, and I was trying to figure it out the same way that, he was. So it's kind of like we were both at the starting line. And obviously we know where Canaan ended up, but it's really like also unpacking the humanity of how your environment can influence you. and how people become who they are is really interesting to me. You know what I mean? And we're so quick to judge and sort of like, throw a dart at the board and say this or that, but it's like people go through things that affect them, and everyone's different, and everyone takes that on differently. And so again, we know how Kanan ended up, which is like a monster, but
Yeah,
it's like, but we was the little boy in the monster,
yeah, true.
because the monster was a human first, and so that was interesting to me. That was a really unique sort of look into the Power universe, in my
Mm.
opinion.
Did you know 50 before? Like, were you guys on, were you friends? Had you known each other? Because I know that he's also, because I spoke to him, back during Power, and I remember talking to him about how he was very instrumental in who he worked with, who he brought on,
Yeah.
calling out Kendrick and being like, okay, you need to come do this with me. I mean, so what were your discussions like with him?
Yeah, I mean, we've met before. We've kicked it. A couple of times. I can't say that we're necessarily friends in that way, but yet maybe, who knows? But um, yeah, he's a cool cat, man. I think the guy's a genius. I honestly feel like that, and to see the trajectory of his life uh, has been amazing. Like as just like as a fan or as a peer, colleague, whatever you want to call it. He's definitely someone who you can draw inspiration from, and he keeps pushing.
Yeah.
And he's very specific in all of his moves, right? It's
Mm.
not just power. So for me to get the call for this was flattering and humbling. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, 50 as a person, I feel like there's a lot of layers to him. And he's the kind of person to whom layers are not normally given by other people, like or understood by other people. You know what I mean? Like everyone wants to put someone like 50 in a box. Like, okay, this is who
right,
he is. And he's never
right,
that person. I mean, you can kind of say the same thing for the character of Kanan. Like
exactly.
this is who we think Kanan is, and this show is all about deconstructing that and showing that to more to that. I mean, is that something that you really responded to as well?
I totally agree with what you just said. And when you say deconstructing, that's what it is. That's
Mm.
literally what it is. You say deconstructing, I say unpacking, or maybe it's both. You know what I mean? Like it's literally that. Like, there's a human before a color, a class, any of that. There's just a human being. And it's like, okay, they have likes, dislikes, this, that, and the other, but they grow up in a certain environment, and people are conditioned and programmed in a certain way. And to survive, depending on where you're at, there's certain things that, I mean, everything is relative, right?
Mm.
Then there's that common thread of humanity of well, morality, and
Mm.
that's the next layer. And it's like, okay, well, how does that play into this little kid who doesn't know anything? You know what I mean? Because he's literally a kid.
Yeah.
you know so to go back to what you said about 50, I think that's what's one of the things that for me is so inspiring about witnessing his journey, is exactly that. This is someone who was probably written off and almost lost their life, and made this massive amount of success with music and so forth and so on, and then transition into television in in a way that is really big. It's not like he didn't just dip his toe in the water. He's kind of just dove in, and has been successful at it. So obviously there's something there that can be learned, and obviously there's a living a way of living life that can be learned, that's effective. And I think that all kind of translates back into Raising Canaan. It's like showing the makings of um, brilliance in a sense. Now, in Power, then the grown Canaan became a monster, but that's all by choices. So there's that part too.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but it's fascinating to watch this world, on like the ambition for it. Like you might think, oh, like you start season one and it's just like, okay, cool. It's this sort of like, soapy, crimey, dramedy thing. And then, but no, this show continues to surprise you and continues to draw yourself and continues to get better. It continues to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And like, that's what's so impressive in watching it
Yeah.
evolve, not only through that original series, but watching, these spin-offs, that just, it takes itself seriously and it makes you take it seriously too.
Yeah.
While also understanding that it's fun, it's a great story, it's just, and so I
It's
think that
enter
balance.
it's entertainment, but I think what Courtney Kemp has done from the construction and the inception of the construction is that it's really about the duality of of human life, right? Like we all kind of have two sides of us, and it's exploring that. So even if you go back to the first Power, and it's just like, oh, it's this dude that's from the streets, and he was a hustler, and blah 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 blah, but now he's got a club and he's trying to go legit. It's like seems like that on the surface, and that's the soapy part. But who that person is and why, it is the deeper emotional part that links you in, you know. And so all of the ancillary things that come from that are reflective of what you and I go through as
Mm.
human beings. Like we all have a duality. We're all straddling a fence in some shape, fashion, or form, in certain parts of our life, at least. You know what I mean? Certain times of our life. And sometimes we choose one or the other, and we know that Kanan was on the dark side.
That's true. Yeah, and we're also like, yeah, fighting our worst impulses. I always think, back to like Carlito's Way. Like I mean,
Mhm.
less Scarface and more Carlito's Way, because that's about a guy who really wants to be better. Like
Right.
there's a goodness in him, but the world around him won't let him be good.
Or
And
you
the
don't,
question,
yeah, because you don't know how,
yeah,
and we have to learn that. I mean, in different parts of our life, whether you're a parent or you're not, or we have to. Sometimes we don't have the tool,
yeah,
and that's what's interesting also to me about the young Kanan character is that again, this is a kid who's growing up with his mom. He doesn't know who his father is. That's relatable hood stuff. So his toolbox is here. You know what I
yeah.
mean? And it's like all of these experiences are throwing themselves in there, and he rationalizes his trauma and learns how to deal with things a certain way,
Mm.
based on what he's around and how, what he knows, how to deal with things. And in life, I think that's very relatable, because we've become such a PC culture, if you will,
Mm.
um, where I think like in the time period in the 90s, that the show takes place in, things were really, they were blunt, but they were authentic.
Mm.
Like you kind of knew where people stood. There were no kind of smoke and mirrors. It just was what it was, which honestly, again, it was blunt sometimes, but you kind of, it helped because you knew what it was. It wasn't something else. Like I'm already trying to unpack this. Now I got to unpack that. You know what I mean? And that nostalgic part of it, I think audiences will flock to.
No, for sure. Especially, yeah, I feel like people aren't, they don't tap dance around things. They don't hide who they really are in a certain way. It's just, it
Exactly.
is, you are who you are. But also, like, so with this character, you're saying you're very much inspired by the generation before. Like, did you dive into the generation before? Like, did you feel like instead of preparing for, okay, I know the world of the early 90s in New York City, I want to go back and figure out what made this character who he was growing up in the 70s? Was that some part of your process?
Oh yeah, for sure. That was for sure, and um that was interesting because it was a learning experience, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? Because it was like what's the best way to say it? It's like the difference between like Dr. J and Michael Jordan, right? Like I knew who Dr. J was and I got it, but Jordan was, he's got the long shorts and and it was but like trying to understand the the difference between those generations was was part of my work, to be honest with you. These guys were coming from a war, and like before, I grew up, it was the crack era. Before that, it was the heroin era. People were coming back, and how the communities were, and activism and things of that nature. This is what they were steeped in their 20s and stuff like that. So for someone like Howard to choose to become a law enforcement officer at that time speaks volumes to who this guy was, or in a way of, like I said earlier, he's a master manipulator. That's his whole thing, is being Geppetto. He's the puppeteer.
Mm.
So it's like he was doing that for a reason, and it might not have been the yeah, hey, I want to clean up the streets reason. He wants the streets clean the way he wants them. you know.
Absolutely. No, and yeah, like I feel like playing a character like that, being able to dive into the complexities of that. When everyone's not like I feel like characters today are so focused on everyone has to be so morally upright. Everyone has to be like you watch these shows and it's like, okay, they need to have they need to have the perfect opinions. They need to reflect exactly how we feel about things in today's world. It's like, no, like
Right.
people came from different worlds. And the best characters rarely have the best opinions about anything. That's what makes them
Right.
interesting.
Exactly. Exactly. It's all about that gray area, because that's where life is. And a lot of life is relative to what you're going through in that moment. And that's what was fun about playing Howard throughout the season. You get to see that, because that power is stripped from him, and then he has to scramble and figure
Mm,
it out. And so it's like, okay, how far is he willing to go?
mm,
And what is he willing to do to try to grasp a sense of the power that he once knew,
mm.
or will he try to grab for more? But you guys got to watch,
As we will,
tune in.
as we
We'll go on a journey with us, and we'll have some fun.
Going back to something you said, right at the start of our conversation, you're saying you're not someone who looks back.
Yeah.
Why is that? I mean, do you just feel like is that something you developed over time, or is that something the way you've always been?
To be honest with you, I just kind of always been like that. Uh, it's something I've been thinking about a lot as of late, because I got 3 kids, and I'm thinking a lot about, and they're all getting older, and so to me, when I look at their young adult faces, I still see an infant
Mm,
baby picture. So I've been thinking about, like, wow, what is it? I don't know. It's just something that I'm always driving forward. But at the same time, I'm trying to learn, and I have learned how to do it better, but how to smell the roses, how to take in the moment, how to, because we never get back that moment of time. If you and I go out for coffee, just to kick it and talk, and we're never going to get that moment in time back.
sure.
So it's like I'm learning how to immerse myself into the moment, um and a part of that is reflection. A part of that is like, wow, and I think part of the driver for me of being that way is because it's almost like that old Janet Jackson song, "What have you done for me lately?" That's kind of how the world treats you, right? Like,
Mm,
you're as good as your last hit, and not like all that type of stuff. So you're just constantly pushing forward, pushing forward, pushing forward. But um, you know, that's just sort of my natural way of being. But I'm learning how to try to balance that and get better. Because we never get the day back.
true. I mean, you never think back to your experiences with Tupac on Juice. Like, is that something that stays in your mind, or?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about stuff, I think about it deeply, and they're kind of like selfish moments where, um, for me, it's less about thinking back to those memories, and it's more about imagining if Tupac were still with us,
Mm,
and what would he be doing, and how, like, I think about, like, what if Pac had an Instagram or Twitter page, you know, like, those are the things that they make me feel good when I think about him, because I knew his personality. I'm like, oh man, if they think this person's crazy, he would have been like on 1,000, you know. But also, but bigger than that, his progression. as a person. I think he probably would have been at least in the community service. I don't know if it would have been political or grassroots organizations or stuff like that. That's the stuff I think about. You know what I mean? And then when I think back to those memories, it's a golden time. We were puppies. Getting a chance to live out our dreams and supportive of one another, and it truly is a blessing to still be here doing what I love to do.
I mean, just as a last question as we wrap, are there any particular memories that are most vivid in your mind?
I mean, there are a lot. There are a lot of them. I can't pick one of over the other, but you know, I remember the first time we ever met, and the me and Tupac, and the conversation that we had was just so deep, and we kind of felt we were like alikes. My mom was educator and things of that nature, activist, and his mom obviously, she was activist and stuff like that. So our conversation was just, we were in lockstep in terms of um, what we were trying to do and why we were trying to do it through through this vein of art, you know. And
Mm.
at a very young age, and moments like that I'll never forget when I think about it. And moments like that help fuel me forward. When I feel like I stumble, or I get tired or frustrated or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's just like, no, we're here for a purpose and a reason, and it all comes back full circle.
absolutely. Well, great pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you,
Love
man. You
talking.
too, man. All right.
Congratulations on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Hope to talk again.